All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the founder and the host of the Rise of Justice Movement and the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. All right. So I am back with another addition to our candidate series where we're interviewing progressive candidates running across the country at all different levels of government, different races, because every single election matters. Now, this one, this is kind of a personal excitement for me. This is somebody that I've been watching. This is somebody that I resonate very deeply with the platform. Without further ado, Oliver, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Zachary, and really excited to talk about our campaign and how we change politics in the Democratic Party here in South Florida. So looking forward to it.
Because God knows we need it. Because I do not feel the current leadership is meeting that moment. And I know I'm not alone in that, or else you wouldn't be running. And speaking of which, it's going to bring me into the first talking point is obviously who you are and why you're running for Congress.
Yeah, my name's Oliver Larkin. I'm a first-time candidate. I've never run for anything before, not even the student council, but I'm a longtime organizer, progressive activist. I got my start in politics as a volunteer, getting into the paid staff role on the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign, traveling the entire country, organizing the Sanders movement. I was the sixth hire in the state of New Hampshire. So really in those early July 2015 summer days, believing strongly that when he was down 50, 60 points in the polls, that we needed people who believed to actually go out and spread the good word. And so that was my jumping off point into American politics. And then, of course, with the way that the 2016 election shook out, I could not simply just step away. So what I did was I went to the digital marketing agency that the Sanders campaign used. In addition to helping organizations like the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, New Florida Majority pass Amendment 4 in 2018, I also helped unionize my workplace with the News Guild Communication Workers of America. And that level of labor agitation, I really think speaks to the heart of the crisis of identity that the Democratic Party is experiencing, where the working class base in this country has just abandoned the Democratic Party. So I'm coming into this race as someone who's helped other candidates for years and years and helped build movements, but I really had to look at myself after 2024 and consider, what do we need to change in order to turn things around, especially after we've seen the bottom just completely fall out for Florida Democrats. And that's coincided with the election of my opponent, Jared Moskowitz. So after he went unopposed in 2024 and really joining Doge and supporting the Lake and Riley Act and doing all of the Republican aligned things that we have assessed Democrats as being, conceding to the far right. We need someone that actually stands up for the base of our party, that stands up for the immigrant community, for the trans community, for everyone that is attempting to be marginalized by this Republican Party. So that's what brings me to this race. And I'm really trying to change not just South Florida, but the entire country with the kind of progressive policy that we're espousing.
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. And speaking of your opponent, talks about healthcare, but then at the same time, and that's like a very, very thin line whenever it comes to talking about healthcare, because we know, yeah, there's money in politics, which we'll dive into here in just a moment. But your opponent, Jared Moskowitz, takes money from pharmaceuticals. You support Medicare for all. I think the choice here is like obviously very clear. And let's dive in and talk about healthcare. So, what is working, what's not working, and what would Medicare for all do for literally everybody? It, we have these for-profit hospitals and healthcare systems that it's very predatory. And I'm speaking from this from personal experience. Watching the last couple of years with my mom, she was diagnosed with stage 3 cervical cancer last year. Obviously, that has kind of opened my eyes a lot to navigating the systems and more of a personal matter. My current incumbent here in Kansas, which is Sharice Davids, luckily she has a candidate running against her that has similar platform to you, Sarah Prue, who's also been on this podcast. Um, but walk me through healthcare and what you support, what's working, what's not working, and let's kind of talk about that and how this would benefit the constituents of your district.
Yeah, and just to frame the terms of the debate, The United States of America is the wealthiest nation on earth not to guarantee healthcare as a right to all people. And that is a byproduct of us paying twice as much per capita for the healthcare we currently get as any other peer nation. So we have an incredibly expensive and wasteful system. But within that, there are real opportunities for us to build on the success of programs like Medicare, programs like Medicaid, programs like the VA that do provide government-run healthcare at a cost-effective level that does not have the profit motive that is continuously extracting more and more wealth out of working class people simply for the sin of getting sick and needing to see a doctor. So there are programs that we can build on. It's not necessarily that we need to completely start over from scratch. And there's legislation in the House of Representatives, currently the Medicare for All Act, that would basically expand the coverage eligibility for the Medicare program, not dissimilar to the way that when the minimum wage is raised, it scales up gradually. Florida passed a $15 an hour minimum wage in 2020. We're going to hit that $15 an hour finally this year. So with Medicare, we could look at dropping the eligibility age from 65, where it is currently, to 55 to 45 to eventually cover every single American from the moment of birth until the time of our passing. And there's some help that we've gotten from the Affordable Care Act, but I think that one of the great faults of the Democratic Party over the last 15 years is to just cling to the Affordable Care Act and try to improve it, improve it, improve it when it's fundamentally it's Romney Care before it was Obamacare. It was conceived by far-right conservative think tanks, and what we're doing in this current system is actually subsidizing the profits of the private health insurance industry. It's just going through the United States government, so it's not necessarily what people are feeling from money out of our pockets, but the government is spending such an incredible amount of money to subsidize the profitability of these private health insurance companies. And another mistake of the Affordable Care Act is we left it subject to states' discretion whether or not we expanded Medicaid. And Florida is one of 10 states that never expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. So we never even got the full opportunity that the ACA promised. And now what we're seeing with Republicans' One Big Beautiful Bill last year, over $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, the expiration of the premium tax credits for the Affordable Care Act, which was those government subsidies subsidizing the profitability of the private health insurance industry, but lowering the cost for average Americans. Now we're seeing Americans having to shoulder that cost. And this comes up when we go door to door, and it is not limited to the working class areas of our community. Even upper middle class families that are all of a sudden they have multiple dependents and they're needing to spend $2,000 or $3,000 a month in their healthcare premiums. This system is not working for anybody. And when we look at Congress and we look at the two largest spenders in congressional lobbying, it is the private health insurance industry and it is big pharma. And those happen to be two of the largest contributors to my opponent, Jared Moskowitz. He's taken money from them. He's traded their stocks. He's even been involved with HCA Hospital Corporation, which is, as you mentioned, a private for-profit hospital that Rick Scott actually ran when he committed the largest Medicare fraud in U.S. history, where he made his millions, actually hundreds of millions, back in the 90s. So this is a corrupt system, and members of Congress that rely on private health insurance, on for-profit medical technology, on for-profit hospital corporations and big pharma, they not only get the corporate PAC donations, but they're increasingly subsidizing their own earnings by trading and playing the stock market, which is just a manifestation of the corruption that we need to confront with overturning Citizens United, getting big money out of politics, banning corporate PAC donations from our politics. And really what we need is an anti-corruption message that actually serves the needs of most Americans. Because when you look at polling, even Republicans and independents support universal health care under a Medicare for all policy. People want to spend less and they deserve to be able to go see a doctor whenever they need to. And that shouldn't be precluded by whether or not you have the ability to pay.
I know all about HCA because remember I was talking about that medical gaslighting? That came directly from HCA. My grandmother also, and well, my grandparents received horrific care or alleged care from HCA because, like you said, it's a for-profit chain. It's literally in their mission statement. And like there is no like patient centered there at all. It's literally like how much money can we get out of you? And it's predatory. People go into medical debt because, like you said, people want to pay less. You know, if we would stage three cervical cancer doesn't just come out of nowhere. It builds up over time, like any form of cancer. It just builds up over time. If we would have had the adequate health care for my mom, because there for a while, Missouri didn't even have expanded Medicaid. You were talking about Florida, which I grew up in Missouri. I live in Kansas now. Missouri has expanded Medicaid. Kansas does not. Not that they haven't tried, but the GOP supermajority shoots it down every single time. And because again, the money in politics, which is the next thing, it affects affordability. It affects that cost of living. You know, you mentioned like some of the concerns that your constituents in your district are having. What are some of those other concerns that you are hearing whenever you've been out door knocking, you've been talking to people? I know you're very active on social media. What are some of those other concerns that you are also hearing from your constituents?
Yeah, and to keep it on healthcare for a moment, it is the fact that people are paying so much in their premiums, their deductibles, their co-payments for just medicine that we need to survive. I mean, insulin has been one of the flashpoints for this, and the fact that insulin was developed and meant to be made available to people at no cost, and now we have patents on it that makes it so expensive. The cost of healthcare is extraordinarily high. But costs everywhere are extraordinarily high. And when we talk about Medicare for all, it's the elimination of premiums, deductibles, copays. And I personally, and I think many other people would be willing to pay a little bit more in taxes. If your taxes are going up by $200 a year, but you're saving $2,000 a year in premiums, that's a pretty fair deal. And so it also comes down to property insurance that people are struggling with if they're homeowners, or the cost of rent. In Florida, I've spoken to people, retirees on Social Security, whose property tax bills have gone up in a single year from $3,000 to $6,000. And we have, again, because it is a private insurance model and it is not profitable to insure homeowners in the state of Florida, especially with the natural disasters that we're experiencing with flooding, with hurricanes. We've seen private insurers just pull out of the state, and it is overwhelming the remaining insurers. Citizens Insurance, which is the state-run program, but is not meeting the capacity need of people here. We're seeing the state preempt laws like in Orange County up in Orlando a few years ago. They passed rent control. Well, the state preempts that when when municipalities in South Florida try to pass labor protections for their workers, the state preempts it. So we're seeing Republicans oftentimes say the best government is the one that's closest to you. That's hollow. They're much more concerned with the consolidation of power and authoritarianism, really. And it's not just in DC, but it is with these conservative states that are overriding the will of local, more left-leaning municipalities. So we see it in Florida over and over again, and it's getting in the way of our ability to address the property insurance crisis, to address the skyrocketing cost of rent. And we're actually seeing in a reversal of the trend from COVID-19, people are actually leaving Florida. There was a survey done last year by Florida Atlantic University that found that more than half of Floridians surveyed are considering leaving our state. And those numbers are overwhelmingly higher for young people who are struggling to find good paying jobs, and they're leaving our state to go to metropolitan areas and higher paying parts of the country because it's simply the cost of housing here is so high, but the wages and the job benefits here are relatively so low compared to other parts of the country. So we're seeing an outmigration. We're seeing families that raise their kids here. Their kids are now leaving and unable to remain where they were raised. So it's an enormous problem, and it's also pushing people further and further away from where they work. They're seeking housing that's more affordable, an hour and a half outside of major metropolitan areas like here in South Florida. At the same time that public transportation is being slashed, Ron DeSantis is cutting FDOT funding, the Florida Department of Transportation funding for Tri-Rail commuter rail service by $27 million dollars when Tri-Rail had record ridership last year. So at the moment where people are looking towards affordable solutions, when it's never been more expensive to have a new car with your monthly payment, where gas is over 4.50 a gallon, where the Brightline, which is the private investment vehicle of our former governor, now Senator Rick Scott, when he refused federal funding to build publicly funded high-speed rail between Orlando and Tampa, he then went behind everyone's backs and privately invested his Medicare fraud money in All Aboard Florida, which became Brightline. We're now seeing Brightline, the only privatized passenger rail system in the United States, now struggling financially, even as their workers, the transportation workers, have unionized and have been battling with management to secure a fair contract that also would address some of the prevailing safety concerns where outlets like The Atlantic have covered the killer train because it is this private, no government oversight over its operations, and people are literally being struck and killed, whether they're in their cars, they're cycling, they're pedestrians on these trains. And so there's tremendous concern around affordability with housing, with public transportation. Even the $15 minimum wage, frankly, is not enough for people down here. I've been on the picket line with striking Starbucks workers in Palm Beach County during the Red Cup period of strikes. They unionized in Palm Springs, the Starbucks location in Palm Springs. So we were there congratulating them the day they organized and won their union. And then when they went out on strike, we were with them because even $16 an hour for a Starbucks barista is not enough to get by in this economy. So we need to have a clear focus on raising wages. And I think that's something that Democrats have quite frankly ignored ever since Kirsten Sinema gave the thumbs down to the $15 an hour minimum wage after that was explicitly promised in 2020 when Joe Biden won, when we were campaigning for Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff in Georgia. If you give me these two Senate seats, you'll get $15 an hour. And when that failed, as a result of people within the Democratic Party, the party leadership just dropped it, did not address it. So we need to recenter this because that when Bernie Sanders was talking about $15 an hour back in 2015, and I was working over a hot grill 40, 50, 60 hours a week for 725 an hour after college, that connected with me because it would materially improve my conditions. It would be more money in my pocket. And that's what Democrats need to be talking about when raising the minimum wage to 25 bucks an hour would give a raise to 86 million working Americans. That's more than voted for either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the last election. We need to take these majoritarian positions that speak to the working class base of this country, not just the people who vote, but the people who are disengaged and feel like politics is not doing anything to serve them.
Whew. Yes, absolutely, 100%. And there was an article that was posted yesterday, kind of talking about your opponent just for a second. Um, and it's from WUSF, the NPR affiliate. And the headline is Congressman Moskowitz pivots to Florida 25C after DeSantis shuffles redistricting map. First of all, what's your reaction? Because it's one of the this is a district that and this is an area that Trump won in 2024 by 9 points. And it's now because currently it's you're in Florida 23, he's the current incumbent. But even if he was to shift, it's the same bullshit, different district, right? And it's like, so what's your thoughts on this? First of all, I just want to get your opinion on this. Just hearing that headline, this is why
Yeah.
gerrymandering needs to be banned literally all across the board.
Yeah, and I take real exception and have a real problem with how these Democratic incumbents in South Florida have not been using this as a moment to affirmatively stand up for voting rights and stand up against the unconstitutionality of this gerrymander, this unconstitutional gerrymander that is in stark violation of Florida's Fair Districts Amendment. It just seems like they're calling dibs on districts rather than standing up and fighting, which is why I've held off on up until this point on committing publicly to a new district because I believe they're illegal and I don't want to validate what Republicans are doing when there are three pending civil lawsuits in the Florida court system by the Equal Ground Education Action Fund, by the Southern Poverty Law Center, ACLU, League of Women Voters, Campaign Legal Center, plaintiffs all across the state that are affected. This is a crisis of democracy, and it is not enough for Democrats to simply try to matriculate themselves into districts where they feel they're best positioned when this entire enterprise is unconstitutional. It is, what we might have called in the 20th century Jim Crow. We've got Tom Cotton in the Senate, and that's, we're living under Tom Cotton, not Jim Crow now. So I think we need incumbents to stand up against this gerrymander, not just concede the fact that, oh, Republicans did it and we're just going to roll with it. Jared Moskowitz has relied on Ron DeSantis as a political patron for two political appointments to the Department of Emergency Management, as well as the Broward County Commission. So this is someone who he has relied on for his political endeavors and ambitions, and he's been very reluctant to criticize Ron DeSantis. We see Debbie Wasserman Schultz right now trying to elbow her way into Florida's 20th congressional district, which is a district established under the Voting Rights Act to elect the first Black Floridian representative to Congress since Reconstruction in 1992. So the 20th district, which for many, many years was represented by Alcee Hastings, recently vacated by Sheila Chairfless McCormick. Look, my district was split in three. We've got Coral Springs and Parkland that got carved out and now span all the way across the state, the Everglades, Big Cypress, all the way over to Naples and Marco Island. That thing is a beast. It is a Republican-leaning district, but it's one that we're capable of flipping, as is the new 25th district, which now goes further up and down the coast and carves out with surgical precision a lot of the more Democratic-leaning parts of the former 23rd district. So the new 25th now goes from Delray Beach in Palm Beach County all the way down to South Beach in Miami. So it's a three-county district. It similar to the 22nd. It has a Republican lean. These are both districts that Andrew Gillum would have won, by the way, in 2018, where I think, and Joe Biden won them in 2020 as well. So Republicans are at serious risk of having stepped on a rake and enacted a dummy mander. But what we need to focus on is, again, not having incumbents call dibs on these districts. And what Debbie Wasserman Schultz is currently attempting to do is muscle out Black representation in the 20th district and just assume that because she's an incumbent, because she has $2.5 million in her campaign war chest, because she's a part of National Democratic Party leadership, that she is entitled to a seat. If she believes so strongly that her brand of politics is what the Democratic Party should represent, then she should have no problem running to flip one of these Republican-leaning districts in a very friendly year for Democrats. So the core integrity of my argument against Jared Moskowitz, this is what I've been maintaining all along, that if we do not stand up and primary these folks, then we're just going to look at an ever shrinking playing field of Democratic influence, and we're just going to see more and more of these Democratic seats be the next dominoes to fall to the Republican Party that is, again, has an authoritarian bent, and we don't currently have Democratic leadership that is capable of fighting back and building and consolidating a working class base. So this is an ever shrinking field, and I know for you in Kansas and Missouri, I mean, this has been played out all across the country, in Ohio
Mhm.
and West Virginia and Louisiana and Arkansas, in states that in our lifetimes, Democrats were winning, but then just decided to abandon it. And that's been the narrative about Florida. And we cannot just allow for these Democratic incumbents to feel entitled to these new seats just because they've been in office and presided over these failures. So um, again, the core integrity of our argument against Moskowitz, this is what we're maintaining. We're, again, holding off from fully committing until we know the outcome of these cases. But Jared Moskowitz is a poster child of everything that is wrong with the Democratic Party and why I think it's lost so much faith among the working class base of voters, because Jared Moskowitz is describing himself as a DeSantis Democrat and chasing these Republican votes that they're never going to like you as much as they like the real thing. And so I think it's a race to the bottom, and we need progressives and someone like myself, a democratic socialist, to assert a different kind of political vision for South Florida and for the rest of the country that's suffering under Republican rule.
Yeah, speaking of which, the United States Supreme Court issued that 6-3 decision in the Louisiana case, which struck down the Louisiana's second majority Black congressional district, declaring that racially conscious redistricting under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional, which is why it's even more imperative to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and also the For the People Act, which I know you talk about um, on your my gosh, why am I blanking? On your platform, on your website. And then I know that you were also endorsed by Mr. Beat, which my fellow Kansan, uncapping the House because it was capped at 435 seats. One congressperson should not be representing 700,000 plus people. That's not democracy. That's called controlled opposition. And that's literally something that all of us are fighting back against. So whenever it comes to For the People Act, whenever it comes to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, because parts of the For the People Act also involves about Citizens United, that 2010 decision from the Supreme Court, which, the Citizens United is like a very small, like, nonprofit. And it essentially stated that money in corporations is free speech. No, That's literally the issue. And I don't see many Democrats fighting back against this because they know that they wouldn't be able to take their APAC money. They wouldn't be able to take these pharmaceutical money. They wouldn't be able to take all of these things that continue to trickle into this trickle down economic system that is clearly failing. It was not meant for people like you and me. It was not meant for people like my mom. It wasn't meant for those single parents. Like, just thinking about that, let's kind of talk about some of the other things that would also get that money out of politics. Ranked choice voting is also another big thing. More democracy, like seeing that. But let's talk about For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and what that would do for your constituents in District 23.
Yeah, and we actually had a town hall about this, which is something that Congressman Moskowitz is not doing. He hasn't had any public town halls since he was elected to Congress, but we've had several of them, and we look forward to doing many more. And we talked about this, the fact that the United States of America, from the formation of our Constitution in 1789, because we had the Articles of Confederation for the first dozen or so years of the country. But once we had the Constitution and we had the House of Representatives, it grew each decade. Every time there was a decennial census, there was a redistricting that expanded and grew the size of the House of Representatives. So it did not start at 435. It was much smaller. It grew and grew and grew up until 1929, when, under, I should mention, Republican leadership, the Congressional Apportionment Act of 1929 was passed. It capped the size of the House of Representatives at 435 seats. The United States population has tripled since then. It's tripled. It's grown three times. When the Federalist Papers were written, House districts were envisioned to represent about 30,000 people. I'm not saying we need to go to that. That would be 11,000 members of Congress. I'm not opposed to it. I don't think that any of these individual members of Congress should have the level of power consolidated around them that they do. And I think that's a big problem. People get to Congress and they get so power hungry that they see themselves ruling over a larger and larger portion of the electorate. But even with modern technology, you cannot feasibly represent 750,000 or 800,000 people. It's just too inaccessible. So we need to expand the House of Representatives, and within that, we, with the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which were introduced under Joe Biden and the last time Democrats had control of the House of Representatives, these would do a few things. With the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, it would reestablish all of the provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It would reinstitute federal pre-clearance for states to enact new voting rights laws. That was what was struck down in 2013, Shelby County v. Holder, the case out of Alabama that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. That removed federal pre-clearance in 2013, and that is when we saw states like North Carolina enact voter ID laws. We saw states all across the South and Republican-controlled states raise the threshold for voter participation and enacting a lot of these voter suppression measures. That would not have previously been allowed had those been subject to review by the Department of Justice from these states that have a history of voter suppression. So 2013 Shelby County v. Holder, that removed federal preclearance. And then we've seen the Voting Rights Act just get chipped and chipped and chipped away at more and more. So we need to reestablish the VRA. And we also need, with the For the People Act, it would do a number of things. It would overturn Citizens United through the Congress, so it would get big money out of politics. It would also establish Election Day as a federal holiday. It would enact automatic voter registration. It would enact same-day voter registration if you want to switch your political party on the day of voting. It would also make it easier for early voting, for absentee balloting, and we could also look at doing what you suggested, which is ranked choice voting. New York City does it. Alaska does it. That's how Mary Peltola was able to be elected to the House of Representatives, a Democrat in Alaska, and why she's so competitive right now in the United States Senate race. There's also ranked choice voting in Maine. This opens up the country to not just the two-party duopoly of Democrats and Republicans, but makes third parties increasingly viable. And while I am a Democrat and I have been a Democrat since I was 16 years old, I'm also a democratic socialist. And I believe that this two-party system is really just not in service of the vast majority of Americans. And if we open the party up with open the voting system up with ranked choice voting and also looking at proportional representation, multi-member districts. What I've seen a lot, and it's somewhat amusing in a very dark kind of way, but I see Republican accounts talking about how Vermont, Delaware, they don't have any Republicans in Congress. And it's like, well, right, because Congress hasn't grown in 100 years. And I see no reason why, if Vermont had 33% of people voting for Republicans, why shouldn't they have one representative and Democrats have two? I mean, that's just a fair and accurate reflection of what people in this country want and making sure that everyone has a seat at the table and their voice heard in this country. And I believe also when we talk about the kind of zero sum mentality of first past the post, where you can get elected with 30% of the vote in a split field and never have to even consolidate a majority of support, it entrenches the extremes. And I'm not saying that as I believe that even though I'm a democratic socialist, we represent the center of what people believe. Most people want a living wage. Most people want affordable housing. Most people want good jobs that pay that have union protections. Most people do not want to see corporations and big businesses influence our politics. So I actually believe we're much closer to the center. But when we have this first past the post system, when we have the influence of corporate money in politics, it incentivizes the extreme voices, the people who are seeking to take our rights away, those on the far right. And so I think if we're able to establish a new kind of democracy with the For the People Act, with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, with Citizens United overturned, it would really make our representatives more responsive to the people they serve. And that's ultimately what everyone wants. And whether you're a Republican bemoaning living in a blue state or a Democrat bemoaning living in a red state, what we're seeing with this redistricting war all across the country. And again, I still believe that Democrats are putting it before the voters. Virginia, California, it's going before the voters. So there's still more democracy on our side of it. But it's still a race to the bottom regardless. I mean, when you're looking at having the largest state in the country in California, now looking at 2028, potentially eliminating every single Republican district, when states like Texas and Florida are trying to get there by eliminating as many Democratic leaning districts as we can, it's just increasing the polarization and further eroding people's trust in government, and it consolidates the power around big money. And that's something that we're seeing with Florida redistricting. The people who are advantaged most greatly in this reshuffling are the people that already have the corporate PAC donors, the APAC donors that can drop $1 million on their behalf at a moment's notice. Grassroots candidates like mine, like ours, we rely on small dollar donations. We rely on grassroots organizing. We've been canvassing. We've been going door to door in the previous 23rd district since November. Now they're talking about cutting out half of our district. So it really does advantage the entrenched interests, the corporate lobbyists, the big money, and it disincentivizes the people who are closest to our democracy. So that's something that we need to really confront.
Speaking of something to confront is obviously the cost of living and the minimum wage. The minimum wage has not increased since July of 2009 on the federal level, which is 7.25 an hour. Thinking about that and thinking about the uh, just the affordability, the AI data centers that are popping up around the country. The governor of Utah stated that the state of Utah, and he was essentially talking about other states, have a quote unquote moral obligation to build these AI data centers. And it leads to that question of like, how much were you paid to actually say that? Because you're obviously not listening to the constituents of your state and in these districts, and they're not building a lot of these data centers in like these big ass cities, right? Like I live right outside of Kansas City, Missouri, right? They're building it in areas that already struggle with those costs. They already struggle with the lack of water or, clean water, et cetera. Like Flint, Michigan hasn't had clean drinking water for close to a decade now, possibly even a little bit longer. But thinking about these AI data centers, Janet Mills, the current governor of Maine, vetoed the data center bill, which was LD 307, which would have placed a temporary moratorium on in the state of Maine, but she vetoed it. And the legislature upheld that veto by 72 to 65. because it failed that threshold. And think about these AI data centers. What's your reactions to it? And are you hearing concerns from people in your area about these data centers?
Yeah, this is a tremendous concern, and it actually spans across both Democratic and Republican
Yes.
voters because everyone has to pay the utility bill. And in
Yes.
the state of Florida, Florida Power and Light, one of our largest energy utility providers, they raised rates on Floridians by $7 billion against the recommendation of Ron DeSantis's person in the Florida government, who actually said that Floridians are being overcharged by several $100 million. They still overrode that recommendation, and the public utilities are now $7 billion higher. And with these AI data centers, it is increasing the water usage, which already in Florida, recreational water usage for things like golf courses take up two-thirds of all recreational water use. It is an incredibly wasteful system. And now with these AI data centers, you mentioned they're not in the heart of these big metropolitan areas. In Palm Beach County, they're trying to build one on the edge of the Everglades. Out in these rural communities, these working class Black and brown and immigrant communities that don't have the same political voice and seat at the table, so they think they can be taken advantage of. We've seen, I was mentioning Kirsten Sinema with the minimum wage. We just saw her resurface lobbying for an AI data center out in Arizona. So there's incredible money behind this. Sam Altman and OpenAI. I very much fear, frankly, that we're in an AI bubble because there's so much investment being committed towards these AI data centers, but they're not actually being constructed because there's so much public opposition to them. And again, it spans both Democrats and Republicans. And we even see Republican politicians campaigning against these AI data centers, not dissimilar to the way that Democrats are. So this is really another example of it's not necessarily left versus right. It's the big money versus the power of people. And those of us who do not want to see our environments defiled by AI data centers, and we don't want to see our utility costs go higher and higher and higher. And this is another example, to bring it back to Jared Moskowitz, where he takes money from investor-owned utilities, not just Florida Power and Light, but the Southern Company, by Duke Energy, by Chesapeake Bay Energy. So there are so many investor-owned utilities, and it's really one of the most corrupt entities in U.S. government because they pay money to people on both sides. The same way that in Florida, Big Sugar owns politicians on either side of the aisle, and that's another one where the Fanjul family contributes to Jared Moskowitz. They also contribute to Donald Trump's PAC and even to the ballroom. So there's a tremendous overlap here, and I think what this really speaks to is AI. Who is it for? Who is it in service to? When it is being used to create political propaganda. We saw those obscene videos that Andrew Cuomo was running against Zoran Mamdani in the New York City mayoral race last year. AI has a lot of money to spend, and they're willing to drop it. We're seeing now it's not just APAC in this election; it is AI, it is cryptocurrency, which Jared Moskowitz took over $250,000 in outside help from Sam Bankman-Fried, the convicted crypto fraudsters PAC, when he was elected for the first time in 2022. So it is all of these outside entities with money to spend that have the political favors and that are being done for them, like Janet Mills. They're flexing their influence, and it's going to take people to stand up to say, who is AI really for? Who is it in service of? Is this to the ultimate benefit of the American people, or is it just consuming more and more energy, and it is uh, funneling these profits to a very select few number of billionaires like Sam Altman or like Sam Bankman-Fried in previous years? We see it over and over again. These very kind of shady individuals that pop up out of nowhere and have all of this money to spend on politics. This is another reason, yet another reason why we need to overturn Citizens United. But I'm very skeptical of what AI can do, and I believe this is a cause for us to really examine the role of the U.S. government in the AI field, and as well as in just social media and the big tech atmosphere. We've seen Palantir, the AI surveillance company, move their corporate headquarters to Aventura, which is in the new 25th district. Florida is increasingly, and South Florida is seen as kind of fertile ground for these shady individuals and corporations to kind of make their headquarters, and that means that there's an imperative for candidates, for grassroots candidates, to stand up and say, no, you don't belong here in South Florida, and we're actually going to put a stop to you trying to flex this influence over the US government.
Mhm. Absolutely. Speaking of a flex over government, ICE and DHS obviously is a very big like conversation right now, and there's currently battles going on whenever it comes to funding ICE and then funding FEMA, which FEMA should have its own like separate entity. Being under the Department of Homeland Security is insane to me. Um, if you're older than 2003, you're older than DHS, which was created out of alleged fear, right? And I say alleged in bold, underlying, capitalized. But if you're older than 2003, you're older than DHS. Just like if you're older than 2010, you're older than Citizens United. So it's like we have these ongoing things. But what has ICE and like DHS looked like in your district? I know Florida is no stranger. Like I said, Ron DeSantis, Jared Moskowitz. Thinking about ICE and DHS, what does it look like in your district?
Yeah, in Florida, it's been very different than in many of
Mhm.
these blue cities. We've seen ICE and CBP agents descend and put cities like Minneapolis and
Mhm.
Los Angeles and Chicago under siege. It doesn't look like that in South Florida. It's a lot more nefarious. It's a lot more undercover because we have Ron DeSantis, our governor, that has basically stipulated that all local law enforcement needs to enter into these 287G
7G.
agreements to deputize these law enforcement agencies to carry out ICE's work on their behalf. And so when we saw Jared Moskowitz not only vote for the Laken Riley Act as one of 46 Democrats to give ICE this power to detain people with no criminal convictions whatsoever, and we see the overwhelming majority, at least three-quarters of people that ICE is detaining have no criminal convictions on their record whatsoever. Jared Moskowitz not only enabled that, or not only enabled it by signing the letter of gratitude to ICE for signed with 75 other Democrats. He also wrote the personal letter of recommendation for a GEO Group executive vice president, former Florida Republican House Majority Leader Adam Hasner, a literal private prison executive, to become president of Florida Atlantic University, which has on its board of trustees other GEO Group executives. So Jared Moskowitz, our Democratic representative, recommended a private prison executive to lead a public university. How does that square at all, other than the truest manifestation of the school to prison pipeline and endangering students, endangering community members by having I've been on Florida Atlantic University's campus during marches against the 287G agreement, and it reminded me, Zachary, of being in Washington, D.C. and marching for justice after the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. There were SWAT vehicles, there were armored cars, there were snipers on the roofs of university administration buildings. On a college campus, snipers bearing down and police on horseback with assault rifles bearing down on students and faculty members peacefully assembling. It is chilling the level of intimidation and authoritarianism that this university administration in our state, because it's not just FAU, the new 25th district also includes a campus of Florida International University, led by Jeanette Nunez, the former lieutenant governor, DeSantis's former lieutenant governor of the state of Florida. They have a 287G agreement. We see campuses all across the state under the thumb of new Republican leadership that are intimidating students, intimidating faculty. They're leading to fewer and fewer students and making it harder and harder to retain faculty members because they're just afraid of the environment here. Of course, we have Alligator Alcatraz out in the Everglades, but we
Mhm.
also have the Miramar Enforcement and Removal Operations Facility, where groups like the American Friends Service Committee and Quaker organizations and immigrant rights organizations are providing the support to immigrants who are showing up to uh, follow the process. Like these are people who are showing up to do it the right way. And oftentimes that is the point of family separation, and they're then absconded with to Alligator Alcatraz or to what was formerly in the 23rd district, now in the new 20th district, Broward Transitional Center, which is just down the street from Geo Group's corporate headquarters in Boca Raton. The Broward Transitional Center is a Geo Group operated private ICE detention center where one of the deaths in ICE custody in the Trump administration occurred last year. Marie-Ange Blaise, a 44-year-old Haitian national who died due to medical neglect at at the BTC, and we've been at biweekly vigils with immigrant rights groups and indivisible groups, and just people of good conscience to kind of stand together and to join together in prayer and to call for justice. So it's been a lot more nefarious here. It is being the immigration enforcement is being carried out by local law enforcement at the behest of Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. But it is happening, and we need to put a stop to it. And there's a very chilling nexus of the corporations that are contributing to the Republican Party of Florida, that are contributing to Jared Moskowitz, that are also getting these no bid contracts to administer sites like Alligator Alcatraz, whether it's for services or security or what have you. It is a tail wagging the dog, if you might say, where it is just totally being driven by the political patronage of those who are trying to curry favor with the Republican Party and Democrats who work with them. So um, it is incredibly unpopular. Just to frame this again, the old 23rd district, the maps have changed so recently that I don't know the new demographic makeup of the new 25th, but the old 23rd district, 30% of people born outside the United States, not only Spanish speakers, but Haitian Creole speakers, Portuguese speakers, immigrants from all over the Caribbean, Central, South America, and really all over the world. And when we have a Democrat who is voting with Republicans to betray, it is a betrayal of this community. This is the person who's supposed to represent all residents of our district, all residents of South Florida. And instead, we're seeing them buckle and cave to what Republicans are trying to do. And I just think that Republican light kind of assertion is exactly why Democrats lost in 2024. It's why the day I announced my campaign on July 1st last year, the same day that Donald Trump toured Alligator Alcatraz with Ron DeSantis, that's where I went to protest that visit. And to stand with our community, not only the immigrant community, but the Miccosukee tribe of Indians whose tribal sovereignty is being violated with the construction of this illegal immigration detention center on their tribal land. So we're at the nexus of a lot of these different resistance movements, the environmental movement, of course, as well, trying to resist what the DeSantis administration is doing to build Alligator Alcatraz out in the Everglades. So there are a lot of different fights happening here, and I think it's why South Florida people need to be paying attention, because if we don't, then the far right and Palantir and Geo Group and all of these other entities are going to continue to look to South Florida as a safe haven for their nefarious deeds.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned about Ahmaud Arbery, who actually was born on this day in 1994. He would be 32 years old today. He was shot and killed by a father and a son, and also their neighbor on February 23rd of 2020. He was 25 years old, and he was murdered during a racially motivated hate crime while jogging in a neighborhood near Brunswick in Glenn County, Georgia. Thinking about, you mentioned about justice just a little bit ago. So the Equal Access to Justice for Victims of Gun Violence Act is something that you talk about on your platform. And obviously, we need to address gun violence as a public health crisis. Obviously, thoughts and prayers are not working. You mentioned about having parkland in your district. What was your reaction whenever we learned about that devastating shooting at Parkland? David Hogg has been traveling the country and been, advocating to get progressive voices elected that are going to fight back against gun violence. And his Leaders We Deserve is doing some very incredible work. So obviously, shout out to David. Obviously, shout out to everybody else who's organizing and Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action, which I used to be very active with. I was an Everytown Survivor Fellow. I am a survivor of gun violence myself. Two of my closest friends were shot and killed over various reasons. I miss them very much. And gun violence has unfortunately rippled through Kansas City. Our homicide rate was absolutely batshit crazy last year, and it is expected to be even higher this year. So, whenever you learned about Parkland, were you down in Florida at the time of Parkland? Were you down in that area at all,
No,
or?
I remember exactly where I was. I'll never forget that day. I was actually, after the Bernie Sanders campaign, I worked in Washington, D.C., and with his organization, Our Revolution, and the Teamsters and New Florida Majority, I was working at the digital advertising agency that the Sanders campaign used, and we're actually right in the middle of a unionization drive. with the News Guild Communication Workers of America that was ultimately successful. So um, I remember watching the television in the office that day and thinking, oh my God, that's my community. I remember
Mhm.
playing Stoneman Douglas in high school football. I remember shaking hands with Coach Feist in the post game handshake line. Uh, my heart broke. It was unbelievable. And Zachary, as a survivor yourself and having lost people, I mean, it is you cannot imagine what the feeling is like until it affects yourself or your community. And so it really doubled down again, the same way that when Donald Trump was elected in 2016, this was another moment where I just knew that I could not step away from politics as long as this violence persisted, as long as this remained a going issue in this country. And I was so incredibly moved and inspired by the survivors at Stoneman Douglas who spoke at the steps of the federal courthouse in Fort Lauderdale, where I drove by every single day growing up, seeing them speak so powerfully with a national platform really gave me some optimism and some hope amidst the absolute devastation of that day and the weeks that followed. It's emotional just even thinking about it now and thinking about Ahmaud Arbery and those memories of marching in D.C. for justice at the White House and at the Capitol. Um, but this is so central to my campaign. My campaign manager is a graduate of MSD, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. He lost one of his good friends, Joaquin Oliver, in that shooting, and even lost other friends following. It's not only those we lost in Parkland on February 14th, 2018. It is the people who we have lost to deaths by suicide because of the pain and the trauma and the long-lasting effects of this that we've seen uh, even as recently as last year, losing a survivor of MSD to gun violence. So um, with my experience, having worked with senior members of the House and Democratic caucus in Washington D.C. on their campaigns, advocating for the Equal Access to Justice for Victims of Gun Violence Act to remove the legal liability shield that exists for the gun industry that does not exist for any other industry that shields the gun manufacturers from being sued in court by victims or their families or survivors of gun violence. Um, Unfortunately, we know that to make real change in this country, when we're going up against powerful congressional lobbies and corporations, you got to make them feel it with their bottom line, with their checkbooks, because moving people to conscience is simply not enough. If that were enough, we would have seen action after Sandy Hook. We would have seen action after the myriad number of. We would have seen action after Parkland, but we didn't because the profitability of these gun manufacturers is so great. It is so deeply entrenched and they're so deeply intertwined with the corruption of the campaign finance industry that we need to pass this legislation. When President Biden was in office, he said if he had one bill that he could pass for gun violence, it would be removing the legal liability shield for these gun manufacturers, not dissimilar to the way that big tobacco was challenged in court for the injuries they've caused to people over decades of lying. These are the kinds of legal challenges that can actually move the needle and get us closer to gun safety. So I believe we need to ban assault weapons. We need to have obviously universal background checks. We need to finish closing the boyfriend loophole. There was legislation passed while I was working with those Democrats in Congress, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We've seen now in the years that have followed that actually a slight decline in some mass shootings and in some homicide rates. It's not perfect. We have a long way to go, but there's clear empirical evidence that when we pass common sense gun safety legislation, gun violence goes down. And this is not just a problem for the United States, but when you look at arms trafficking and strawman purchases, when you look at the gun violence that exists in Mexico or in Haiti or in other parts of the Caribbean, these are weapons that are trafficked out of states like Florida with extremely lax gun laws that are used to not only harm people in our own communities, but to spread this harm to other parts of our hemisphere. So we really need to take some responsibility for this and end the bloodshed. It is not a reality that we should be living in where going to Publix or going to the supermarket or going to school or church should come with the fear of suffering gun violence, or even the fear of suffering it within your own home. We just lost one of our brightest young legislators, um, Coral Springs Vice Mayor Nancy Mateer. I met her at an interfaith Ramadan iftar a few months ago, and we had a very warm conversation about the political reality in South Florida and bringing a more progressive message. And she was actually preparing to run for Congress, and we were supposed to connect a few weeks later, and then she was murdered by gun violence, and had previously lost her younger brother to death by suicide by gun violence. So um, families are being devastated. We're losing the future leaders of this country because they're being gunned down, and we need to do something. We need to take action. We need to stop this because it is an unacceptable reality that we're living in.
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning about Nancy because whenever it came out and like the news broke that her brother died by suicide, he was a gun violence survivor himself. And I believe it was actually a Parkland. And I posted about her brother and then she messaged thanking us. And then I remember reading the headline, which is from the Miami Herald. I actually just pulled it up. Five police calls made to vice mayor's home before death. Details remain unclear. Thinking about this, it is a systemic failure and it's a policy choice. And our elected officials, Democrats, Republicans, refuse to address gun violence as a public health crisis. It is very apparent that that's exactly what this is, and it needs to be addressed as such because communities deal with the lasting impacts, and families oftentimes have questions go unanswered that usually are never answered at all. Other than, oh, I killed her because she's black. Oh, I killed them because, they're trans or they're gay. Like the gay trans panic defense obviously still exists. We did not learn our lesson with Matthew Shepard, an openly gay 21-year-old college student that was brutally murdered and left for dead in Laramie, Wyoming. I was 3 years old at the time that he was murdered, and just thinking about how far we've come, but how much further we still have to go. We're coming next month is the anniversary of Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida, right? So thinking about this, thank you for centering violence and violence prevention as a part of your platform. Because I've been, like I said, I've been interviewing a lot of candidates. Some of them have it on there, some of them do not. We ended up talking about it because they support it. But I was like, you have to be able to put this on your platform. People are looking at your platform. People are looking at your website. If you don't have this on there, because this is a very deep subject for a lot of people, like myself, this is the core of my advocacy, which is why I created the Right Web Justice Movement to give a voice to the voiceless and those that are no longer here to advocate. We have to continue advocating for them so that way other families do not have to deal with this devastation. In 2026, in the richest country in the entire world, we have the poorest communities and the poorest systems. These systems are functioning exactly how they were designed to oppress the working and the poor and the marginalized and protect that top 1%, the most wealthy and the billionaires that have never struggled a goddamn day in their life. Thank you for letting me rant there for a second.
You said it.
But
You said it.
how can people uplift your work and contribute to your campaign?
Yeah, www.oliverforcongress.com/donate is where you can contribute. And oliverforcongress.com also has our social media platforms. So you can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of the social medias. We're on it. We were even streaming our town hall on Twitch. So we're getting out there in as many platforms as we can find people to receive our message. But it's not just donating. Of course, that is a tremendous help. And I do ask that every single person listening to this or watching this contributes if you can, even $1, even $5 a month. It goes a tremendously long way because I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. And we have real momentum. This is a race that we can absolutely win and a seat that we can win in South Florida to flip the House of Representatives. But if you can't contribute or you contribute and want to do more, you can also volunteer with us. If you're local, we're going door to door. Starting again next week, we've been making one final push for our petition deadline to qualify for the ballot by petition by this Monday, May 11th. We're right on the cusp of hitting it. So if you're local, you can reach out to us on our website if you want to sign a petition and get it in before that Monday deadline. But you can also find links to our phone banking, which you can do remotely from anywhere in the country. We have structured weekly phone banks on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we also have anytime phone banks that are available if you feel prepared, and we have those scripts and call lists available for you at your own convenience. But volunteering locally, going door to door, it's incredibly affirming. I do it myself all the time because it makes me feel closer to the message that we actually need to be reaching voters with. When you hear face to face that someone is struggling with their property insurance bill and they're just getting by on Social Security, or when you see a young mother with her kid in the doorway talking about how can this country support the Dilley Detention Center in Texas or continue to send military aid to Israel as they're dropping bombs on children in Gaza and Lebanon. It just brings you so much closer to the work. And if you're able to volunteer and do that with us, I promise you will get so much out of it. And we need to train the next generation of organizers. This is not about one singular campaign. This is about building a movement across South Florida and giving people the tools to be political advocates for themselves and to really agitate for the kind of change that we need to see in South Florida. So follow us on social media, uplift our message, create your own content, talk about why you're inspired, donate some money if you can, and then help volunteer with us. Those are all incredibly useful ways to help spread our message, and tell your friends and family about our campaign too. That change is possible in Florida, and that with this Republican redistricting effort, all hope is not lost. Florida is still in play. We just need to organize for it.
100%. Oliver, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I believe in the unedited and raw conversation because these are the conversations that we need to be having. And we need more candidates to recognize and also have these conversations. So, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I look forward to calling you the next congressman out of District 23 of Florida because I know you're going to do it. You have the energy, you have the backing. Just thank you for everything that you are doing. It is personal to me because I lost faith in politicians. I lost faith in systems, and you are bringing that back. Like I said, I've been following your campaign for, well, ever since you launched it because I was excited. So I consider myself a huge fan of your work, a huge fan of you, and I cannot thank you enough. Seriously, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zachary, and thank you for everything you're doing, building this platform and spreading this message of so many incredible candidates. I'm glad to be one of them that you brought on. So hope we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much
Take care.
as well.